Feast of St. Brendan, Anno Domini, 841. The morning began as usual, the sun casting its gentle light upon the stone walls of our humble monastery here on the coast. I was at my prayers, hands clasped tight, when the first cry from the watch came. "Longships!" he shouted. I ran to the tower, my heart pounding as I climbed. From that high perch I saw them, dark shapes upon the waves, their dragon-proud ships cutting through the sea like knives. The sight chilled my very bones. The men aboard were unlike any I had ever seen, their hair wild and golden or as red as fire, their beards flowing like the streams of the hills. They wore strange garments, some in leather, others in shining mail, and they carried axes and swords that seemed to thirst for blood. Their faces were fierce, their eyes piercing as if aflame with a hunger for destruction. Painted shields lined their vessels, bright with strange sigils. Their approach was swift and terrible, like the rush of a storm cloud upon the horizon. The brothers and I gathered in the chapel, our voices trembling as we sang the psalms. My hands shook as I lit the candles upon the altar, praying for the strength of the Almighty. My fear was great, yet I held fast to the belief that God would shield us as he had shielded his faithful before. From the narrow windows we watched as they came ashore, their cries filling the air like the roar of beasts. They began to circle our walls, their weapons clanging against one another in a terrible music. I heard them shouting to one another in their guttural tongue, their voices filled with malice and power. I could see their leader, a tall man with a braided beard and an iron helm adorned with horns. He carried an axe so massive it seemed fit to fell the great oaks of Ireland. He barked commands, his voice echoing over the winds. And yet, as quickly as they began their assault, something miraculous occurred. A distant rumble filled the air and the skies above darkened, as though heaven itself prepared to speak. A great bolt of lightning cracked across the heavens, illuminating the earth in blinding brilliance. Thunder followed, so mighty it shook the very stones of our monastery. The invaders faltered. Some fell to their knees, others raised their arms to the sky, as if in supplication. I remembered what the old wanderer once told me. These men of the north believe in gods who wield storms and thunder, gods who strike with the force of nature itself. Did they think this tempest a sign of wrath from their divine masters? For us it was as if the Lord's hand had reached down to deliver us. My heart soared as I saw them begin to retreat. Another crack of lightning split the sky, and the storm ceased as suddenly as it had begun. The clouds rolled back, revealing a pure and radiant blue, the sun shining brighter than I had ever seen. The sea glittered like gold, and the air grew calm. It was as if heaven itself had opened to declare victory over these heathens. The Viking ships returned to the water, their oars pulling them away, their shouts subdued. They left without taking a single life, without breaching our walls. I fell to my knees in gratitude, tears streaming down my face. God's mercy had spared us. I believe the lightning and thunder were not only a sign of his power, but also a declaration of his protection over his faithful. Yet I wonder, did their God, the one of storms, also play a hand in their retreat? Perhaps they too saw the light of truth this day. I pray for the souls of those men, that one day they may know the peace and love of the one true God. As for us, we will keep the candles lit and the prayers unbroken, giving thanks for this deliverance until our final breath. The morning greeted us with a calm so profound it felt almost sacred, as though heaven itself had sighed in relief. The storm that had roared through the night left no trace upon the land, save for a freshness in the air and a sky so blue it seemed almost unreal. The sea, which had writhed like a living thing in fury, now lay still, glittering in the sunlight. It should have brought me peace, yet my heart remains heavy, burdened by an unease I cannot shake. Though we gave thanks for our deliverance, I could not help but feel that the darkness of the night had not truly passed. The raiders had been driven away, but the ferocity I saw in their eyes, the hunger that burned within them, I feared it would bring them back. They are not men easily deterred, and the memory of their cries still haunts me. As the hours passed, we busied ourselves with our duties, though there was little we could do to mend the brokenness within. Then, faint at first, I heard it. The unmistakable sound of hoofbeats, slow and deliberate, carrying across the open fields. The brothers gathered at the windows, straining to see who or what approached. It was a lone Northman. He rode a dark horse and bore no shield, no weapon that we could see. When he reached the outer wall, he called out in a tongue thick and unfamiliar, but we soon realized he was speaking, albeit poorly, in our language. "Come," he said. "Talk. I want to take vow to your God." His words sent ripples of shock through us. The brothers began to murmur, their voices rising in argument. "It's a trick," Brother Finan declared, his face pale with fear. "They wish to lure us out." "Can we risk turning away a soul seeking salvation?" countered Brother Yogan. "What if he truly desires to repent?" The argument grew heated, but it was the abbot who silenced us all. He raised his hand, his face solemn yet resolute. "If God has sent this man to be accepted into his bosom, who are we to deny him? We must trust in his plan, whatever it may be." With those words, the abbot chose 3 brothers to accompany him to the main gate. The rest of us watched anxiously from the narrow windows, our breaths held as though the air itself had thickened with dread. The Northman dismounted his horse slowly, raising his hands to show he was unarmed. His face was grim, his golden hair catching the sunlight, and he walked with purpose. When he reached the abbot, he fell to his knees and bowed his head. "I want to vow," he said, his words halting but clear. The abbot nodded, speaking to him softly, though I could not hear the words. Then, as the sacrament was about to be given, the Northman sprang upwards like a coiled serpent. He struck the abbot with his head, sending him sprawling to the ground. A terrible laugh erupted from his throat as he drew 2 daggers from his belt, hidden beneath his tunic. The brothers who had accompanied the abbot stumbled back in fear as the Northman lunged at them. The chaos that followed was swift and terrible. From behind us there came a deafening noise, a cacophony of roars, shouts, and the clamour of weapons. I turned to see them, the rest of the horde spilling over the back wall of the monastery, which had been left unguarded in our foolish focus on the lone rider. More came from the woods that bordered our sanctuary, their cries of bloodlust chilling me to the core. They fell upon us with merciless fury. Those who stood to fight were cut down. Those who ran were hunted like beasts. The air was filled with screams, the clash of steel and the sickening thud of bodies falling. "Come out," they called to those of us who had managed to hide. "You will be spared." I crouched with others in the shadows of the chapel, my heart pounding so fiercely I feared it would betray us. The sounds of death surrounded us, yet I could not move, could not breathe. I do not know what I will do. Do I step into the light trusting their promise of mercy? Or do I remain here, clinging to the faint hope that I may yet survive unseen? My faith tells me to trust in God's plan, but fear clouds my judgment. If I die this day, may it be with his name upon my lips. If I live, may I find the courage to carry on. The day I was taken. It was fear that bound me in the shadows, but it was faith that finally moved my feet. I could not stay hidden any longer, knowing my brothers were calling out in vain for mercy. Trembling, I emerged from the darkness of the chapel and stepped into the light of destruction. The scene before me was one I will carry to my grave. Blood stained the floor of the holy place, pooling around the lifeless bodies of my brothers. Brother Finan lay near the altar, his arms outstretched as if in supplication. Brother Yogan's eyes were open wide with terror, his hands clutching his throat. I could barely breathe as I walked among them, my steps faltering with every body I passed. The Northmen had turned our sanctuary into a den of chaos. They shouted and laughed as they desecrated all that we held sacred. I saw them throwing the holy books to the ground, tearing pages from their bindings and scattering them like leaves in the wind. One of them kicked over the font of holy water, letting it spill across the stone floor. Others were busy packing the monastery's gold into heavy bags and chests, chalices, crosses, candlesticks, all taken as plunder. My heart burned with anger, hotter than my fear, and before I could stop myself, I spoke. "How dare you defile this holy place? Do you not fear the wrath of the Almighty?" The leader turned to face me, a man taller and broader than the rest, his braided beard streaked with grey. His expression was one of amusement, as though I were no more threatening than a fly. I continued, though my voice shook. "Do you think this gold will save you? Do you think your gods will protect you from judgment?" I barely saw the axe before it struck me. The blunt side of the weapon slammed into the back of my head, and I crumpled to the floor. Pain exploded in my skull, and the world around me dimmed to blackness. When I awoke, I was no longer in the monastery. The air was cold and sharp, biting at my skin. I realized with horror that I was naked, my hands and feet bound in iron chains. I lay on the deck of a longship, its dragon prow rising before me like a terrible omen. Around me, the Northmen spoke in their guttural tongue, their voices harsh and mocking. I struggled to sit up, but the movement drew their attention. One of them barked a command, and a pair of rough hands yanked me to my feet. They dragged me to the centre of the ship, where the leader I'd confronted stood watching me. "You," he said in his broken English, "you go to Wales, you monk, you tell monks there, give gold, or we come." My heart sank. They intended to use me, to send me as a pawn to frighten my brethren across the sea into surrendering their treasures. I shook my head, refusing even to consider it. "I will do no such thing," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "I will not betray them." The leader's face darkened, and he barked something to the men holding me. They grinned wickedly and dragged me to the side of the ship. I felt the cold wind whip against my bare skin as they held me over the edge, the icy water below roaring in my ears. "You do," the leader said, his voice sharp and final, "or you die." The waves crashed beneath me, their cold spray stinging my face. My chains were heavy, and I knew that if they dropped me I would sink like a stone. I closed my eyes and prayed, not for deliverance, but for the strength to endure. If this was my end, I would meet it with the name of the Lord on my lips. But if I survived, if I could find a way to turn this evil into good, then perhaps my suffering would not be in vain. They held me there for what felt like an eternity before dragging me back onto the deck. I gasped for air, shivering uncontrollably, but my resolve had not broken. They may have taken me from my home, from my brothers, from all that I knew, but they could not take my faith. Now I am bound, helpless beneath their watchful eyes as the longship cuts through the waves toward Wales. I do not know what awaits me there, but I know this: I will not yield to these men. The day of retribution. The journey to Wales was a torment of cold, hunger, and pain. The Northmen gave me little to eat, and the iron shackles bit into my wrists and ankles, leaving raw and bloody marks. My body shivered uncontrollably as the salty spray of the sea drenched me again and again, and each night I huddled on the longship's deck, staring at the stars above, praying for strength. When at last we reached the shores of Wales, I was dragged from the ship like a lamb to the slaughter. My bare feet sank into the wet sand, and the chill of the morning wind cut through me. I lifted my head and saw it, a monastery perched atop the cliffs overlooking the sea. Its stone walls stood tall and strong, a place of faith and refuge, but to me it looked like a beacon of hope, darkened by the shadow of the evil men who had brought me here. The leader of the Northmen, the one who spoke some of my tongue, shoved me forward. He handed me my robes, and still blood-stained from the massacre at our own monastery. "Put on," he ordered. "Go, tell monks, give gold, or we kill 10. Then all." My heart sank as I obeyed, pulling the tattered robes over my head. They stank of death and despair, a reminder of all I had lost. I was escorted up the path to the monastery, their threats ringing in my ears. When I entered the gates, the monks stared at me in shock and horror, my dishevelled appearance and bloodied garments filling them with dread. I was brought before the abbot, an older man with piercing eyes and a demeanour of quiet authority. I told him everything: the Northmen's demands, their threats to kill the 10 monks they had taken hostage, and their promise to destroy the entire monastery if the gold was not handed over. The abbot listened in silence, his face grave. Finally he spoke. "Brothers," he said, his voice steady, "gather all that we have. Our gold, our jewels, every treasure we hold dear. Bring it to the hall." I was shocked by his words. Was he truly going to surrender so easily? The monks scattered to obey, and I followed the abbot, pleading with him. "You cannot give it to them," I said. "They will only take more and more. They will never stop." The abbot silenced me with a raised hand, his expression unreadable. When the monks returned, their arms laden with the wealth of the monastery, he surveyed it carefully. Then, to my astonishment, he ordered them to hide it beneath the floorboards. "Quickly now," he commanded. "Do not let even a single coin remain visible." I stared at him in disbelief. "Father, what are you doing? They will kill the hostages, and then they will kill us all." He placed a hand on my shoulder and spoke softly. "Follow me, Brother Culman. There is more to this monastery than you know. He led me to a hidden chamber at the back of the monastery, where my eyes widened at what I saw. Inside were more than 70 men, armed and armoured, mercenaries who had sought refuge here when their ship ran aground. They were already preparing for battle, their weapons gleaming in the dim light. "These men have sworn to defend us," the abbot explained. "They will protect this house of God." Still stunned, I followed the abbot up to the highest tower, where he handed me a flaming torch. "You will signal the Northmen to come for their plunder," he said. My heart pounded as I climbed to the top of the tower, the torch burning in my hand. The Northmen saw the flame and cheered, believing their demands had been met. I watched as they approached the gates, their weapons at the ready, their greed blinding them to the trap that awaited. When they entered the monastery, the mercenaries fell upon them with a fury that shook the walls. The clash of steel and the cries of the dying filled the air, and the Northmen, taken completely by surprise, had no chance to organize. Meanwhile, a second group of mercenaries had slipped around the cliffs to the beach, where they set the longships ablaze and freed the captive monks. The battle was over quickly. Those Northmen who survived were captured and brought before the abbot. He offered them a choice: accept the one true God or die by the sword. The sight of them kneeling, trembling with fear, filled me with unease. Though I understood the abbot's intentions, I could not help but feel that a decision made in terror is no true conversion. Faith, I believe, must come from the heart, not from the blade. As I write these words, the monastery is quiet once more, though its halls are stained with the blood of those who sought to destroy it. The Northmen who chose baptism have been taken in, though I cannot say whether they will remain true. The others have met their end. I am left to ponder the will of God in all this. Were we instruments of his justice, or have we merely perpetuated the cycle of violence? I do not know.